I was sitting in the chair here as I was listening to Tim and Joan and had this sinking feeling. Have you ever had that where you're going, I got time to rewrite like what I was going to say? Because I was just so inspired by the work that you guys do. And it's not about the buildings at a very fundamental level. I mean, I'm a real estate guy and I love buildings and I love designing stuff, but if it's not home, if it's not about the people, then don't bother, right? So as I say that, and you'll see some of these slides that we have, they're kind of, they can be a little bit dry. So I'll try and ignore the stuff that you don't get called to, and I'll try and fill in the bits in between with more inspiring stuff. Yeah, and just before we start jumping into that, really we're talking about a housing crisis, and David was talking about at the beginning more about an ownership and a real challenge for people to own their own homes in Vancouver, and yet the people that you've heard so far tonight, and in fact myself, are really actually talking more about rental housing. It's about how do you provide spaces for people to live in. And I'm not taking away from a very important part of our community, and that is that people want to own their own home because of the security and the safety that brings. So I'm not going to specifically address that, but all of these pieces are connected. And most of you probably have heard about the continuum of housing, and that really is from the shelters that Tim talked about up to that ownership. And I guess just trust this evening that all of these pieces are connected. And as we talk about, in our case, talking about what sometimes technically referred to as like workforce rental housing. So it's people who are working there, and typically we're aiming for people with household incomes in the range of kind of 25,000 to 60,000. That's kind of who we serve mostly. And if we can get creative and create housing for people that have less than that income, we love doing that. But sometimes in what we do, we have to focus in that middle section and hope over time that we can serve people at lower income. So just with that context, I'll kind of jump in. Who is Catalyst? Our overarching goal is that we want to leverage real estate for social change. Now that sounds pretty grandiose and sometimes might be going, I don't even know what that means. But really it's about taking these assets, whatever they are, and they can be real estate assets or they can be money, but they also can be human resources, and say, how do we leverage those for social change? And when we talk about church property and an incredible amount of real estate assets, and people have known this for many, many years, that there's these parking lots and there's underutilized properties, but they haven't really been able to find a consistent way to develop that out. And underlying what we do, and it's kind of that piece at the bottom of securing assets in community hands. These assets and land and buildings are already in community hands. They're owned by the churches, they're owned by nonprofits. And I get worried when I see, and one of the reasons for creating Catalyst was that I saw really one of the very few options that church communities had when looking at redeveloping their property was to go the route of a joint venture with a market developer. And we've seen a number of those projects around town where a market developer will build a large condo tower, they'll build a new church, and then they'll give the church a new space back and a check usually, right? And that's fine, and the first project that I'll talk about is really this Oakridge Lutheran Church property. And they were faced with this dilemma. They have an old and aging property. They have a congregation that is struggling at times, numbers-wise, and they have a property that's really not that suitable for what they do now and what they want to do in the future. And yet, so they were literally, developers were knocking on their door saying, hey, we'll build this new, very beautiful building, and we'll give you a new church and we'll give you a large check. And that ticked, I would say, kind of 2 of maybe 4 or 5 of the boxes that the church was interested in. And what the church was interested in was not only that idea of a new church facility, but they really wanted to make a contribution to the community that they resided in. And they also wanted to create a revenue stream for themselves to support the mission that they're already involved in and want to be involved with in the future. And so the market developer model didn't really tick all of those boxes, and they wanted, for their own security, they wanted to have a long-term interest in more than just the church. So we started having discussions with them about converting their existing building into a joint venture with a developer in the form of Catalyst. But Catalyst is a non-profit society. So we wanted to create a project that really ticked all of those boxes. So basically what we're going to be doing is replacing the existing church building. We are going to try and reclaim quite a few components of the church and implement and put them back into the new building. And carry through some really neat design elements of the existing church into the new building as well, through things like colored glass and designs of things like that. We're really fundamentally, at the end of the day, what the building will be made up of will be a new church space and community space. And we've, in talking to a lot of church groups, we go, well, really, when you think back, churches were literally at the center of communities. That's where the community started growing from, in the original communities that we built. And so they were literally at the center of the community. But then and they were used as churches, but they were also used by the community for a whole range of different things. But then in more modern society, we started building community centers, right? So that kind of started, a lot of people start using those community centers for different uses. And I think one of the things when we look at what can a church be moving forward from today, if they realize that in their process of reinventing themselves and reinventing how they deliver their mission in the community, can we go back to being that center of the community? Can we go back to that this is a space to be used by the community, and one of those community uses is gathering and congregating as a church, as opposed to building a building that is so specifically built as a church and then trying to kind of jam other uses in. So that's a kind of long way of saying that the space in this building, which will be at the second floor, is going to be more, hopefully, more broadly and flexible and used by a whole variety of community organizations as well as the church for their particular uses. So that's the space that will be at the second floor. And then the top 4 floors are going to be below market rental housing. So, and then the ground floor will be retail space that will be rented at market to generate revenue to support the affordable rents in the housing. So that's the kind of nuts and bolts of it. How Catalyst is involved is that we're not just like a consultant. Like we bring forward not only our real estate expertise and our shared mission and vision as a nonprofit, but we also bring money to the table. And where we get that money from is we have some of our own equity in our organization, but we also raise what we call social equity investment. So we want to bring these projects as vehicles to people who want to use their money in a way that's going to create community benefit. So they invest the money in these projects, they get the money back, and they get a return for it. But it's a what we would call a fair return, and it's below what they could get if they put it into help financing a condo project or in the market. So it's still a return, and they get the money back, but it's kind of putting your money to good work. And so we hope that the more of these projects we can do, the more vehicles we can provide for people to do that. And when you're looking at a project, as you see here, of $26 million, it's a big nut to crack. So We have drawn a lot, quite a few investors and people who are really committed to the social mission of our project. So at the end of the project, the church will own their own space 100%, and we will jointly own the remainder of the building. The church will own 60%, and we will own 40%. Now that's in this particular case, but it gives you an idea. So we are a long-term owner and operator of this building in partnership with the church. So again, rather than a market developer, and to be fair, I've done market development, I still do it on occasion, and so there's nothing wrong with them, but it's just a different approach where we are in for this for the long term. We want to own these buildings forever, literally. So that's the kind of model that we're using for this project. I'll just talk about a couple of other ones that you'll get a flavor of what we do, and then at the end I'll talk a bit about the kind of starting pieces that when we start working with church groups or other nonprofit groups. So this is a project that we're doing out in Port Moody, which has different dynamics, in its location and values, and all the numbers are all different. But basically, the fundamentals are the same. Here's a church community in Port Moody. It's the United Church, and they own a large piece of land with a small church on it. And that church again is kind of coming to the end of its life, and they want to do something. But again, these guys were motivated very much by the social mission. They had a very strong vision for what they wanted this project to be. And they really wanted to be about community. And again, they had those pieces that they needed a revenue stream. They wanted a revenue stream to support their mission as a church. And these projects have to be based in mission. Again, I go back to the earlier comment of, if this is just about building a real estate project, don't bother. If it's not going to further the mission of your organization, find something else to do. Go help Tim and Joan out doing the work they're doing, because just doing a project for its project's sake is not worth it. So again, a really interesting part of this project is that there's going to be, they said from the start, we want the community to come to this building, as well as we will reach out to the community. And so we're still in the kind of initial stages. We're just about to go in for rezoning, and we're putting together our deal with the church. But we've been able to attract a nonprofit partner who supports people with developmental disabilities. And they actually want to buy a large piece of this project at the end, 15 to 20,000 square feet. It's a big space to run a children's center for children with developmental disabilities. And so you have a church component, a new church, which you see here, and you have this children's center component, and then we'll have about 70 housing units, which will be all below market rental housing. And we're in the middle of, as I say, of negotiating all of those different pieces and putting all the different components together. But again, it would be the case of that at the end, the church would own their space, the children's center would own their space, and then the church and Catholics would jointly own the housing units at the end. And we would look after the whole building and operate the housing on behalf of ourselves and the church. Yeah, this is a project that we have been involved with for quite a while in Victoria with St. John the Divine, which is an Anglican church. And I flag this just as another example, but it's also, I say it because just last week I met with them, and we have been trying to help them go down the road to develop some extra land that they had. And for some reason, it just wasn't working. It was a struggle, and we couldn't get the right partners together. We were acting more as a development advisor to the church as opposed to Catholics doing the project. And we just couldn't find another group that was ready and willing to do it. And so, to be frank, the church has taken a step back. And this is the important thing to do, is don't think you always have to do it because you said you were going to do it. It's got to be right, and it's got to flow, and it's got to be aligned with your mission. And if it's not, step back and rethink it until it's ready to go. It's an important piece. And then just a couple other examples. Now, these are not church-related projects, but this is another project that we're doing in Victoria. And in this case, we're actually acquiring land from a developer. We're buying from a market developer. And when they originally did their rezoning with the city, they set aside an affordable housing fund to support the delivery of below market rental housing. So we're going to be buying the land. We're going to be building the building. We're raising that social equity piece that I mentioned, in this case around $850,000. We're going to get the building built, and then once it's built, we receive those funds from the Affordable Housing Fund. We decrease our mortgage, and then that's how we're able to deliver that below market rental housing. So a slightly different model, but just another example. And the key piece for this one for us is that we're going to own 100% of this building. And so right now, for example, we're hopeful of renting studios in this building for around $650 a month, which is still quite a bit above like the welfare or shelter allowance threshold, but it's again providing that housing. It's secure. We're about maintaining those rent levels where they are, or even over time as we pay down debt on this building, we're actually able to decrease rents. And that's the thing about it. They might not always start off where you want them to be on that affordability scale, but once they're built and once you've got control of them and you get to say how it goes, and if it's a community organization that owns them, then you can improve things over time. And we're going to be sitting 20 years down the road. Again, if we continue to see these assets moving from community hands to private ownership, we're going to be sitting in 20 years going, why did we do that? Like, this is insane, right? So this is, for that reason, we're particularly excited about this. I'll just quickly talk about this. Another project down in South Surrey, where we're acting as an advisor to this community group called Semiahmoo House Society. It's another organization that provides support to people with developmental disabilities. They piece together this land adjacent to their main program building, and we help them put together a 71-home. All of the units will be below market rents, and 20 of the homes will be for people with developmental disabilities. So that not only affordable but inclusive, and that was a very key part of the program for Semiahmoo House Society. And the great thing about it is, again, they originally thought they were going to have to build this as a condo project, sell a bunch of condos, and then end up with 15 or 20 units that they could have their people live in. But working with a variety of people, we figured out a way that they could actually build this as a 100% rental building, and they will own this asset 100% on their own, basically forever. So another way to see how you can really use real estate assets to further your mission. So just to kind of wrap up, and again, this is one of these really dry slides I was embarrassed about as I'm sitting listening to these guys. But basically, this is a kind of process, and it's important for groups who are looking at getting involved in a real estate project to know that it's not about if you say, okay, we're going to do this thing, of course you have a commitment that you want to fulfill it, but there are various points along the way. So we kind of try and break it up into more bite-sized pieces that you do some investigation, you do some work, you get more information, and then you decide if you want to go to the next stage. And then you do the same thing, and then you go to the next stage. And there's options. If St. John and Divine found out, hey, this isn't really working for us, and they took a step back, and that's okay, because you don't want to force through one of these projects if it's not continually going to support your mission. And the first couple of stages, though, is that we work a lot with groups when they start off about the mission, not about the vision for the project, but the mission of your organization. And a lot of churches, I don't need to tell you guys, are looking at what is our mission? Like we're having to reinvent ourselves, like what we do and how we do it and what we do in the community is the rules are getting rewritten right now. And so there has to be a clarity of what your mission is, and that little sort of tree illustration is the St. Andrew's United Church articulated their vision visually, and it's about learning, giving, and healing. And at the roots of this is their Christian faith and their fellowship. So they really took a long time, about a year, to actually really get clear on their mission and make sure that everyone was aligned on that mission. And then, and only then, did they start, and then they looked at their own capacity as an organization. But only then did they actually start creating a vision for the project that was deeply rooted in that mission, that shared mission that everyone was aligned on. And consistently through the process, we've come back, and more importantly, they have come back and said, yeah, okay, if we have a decision to make, we filter it through this mission and this project vision to make sure that we're continually aligned with that. So in conclusion, basically, I invite people, as Tim would say, to take a step, like move forward, and what does that look like? And a starting point is to get together with the people you know in your community and go, what is our mission? Like, why do we want to do what we want to do? And then from there, create a clear vision for the project. And so I invite people to jump in, and let's do this together. Thanks.